To me, I always found it interesting when I come across fans' opinions on Tim Drake, otherwise known as the third Robin. A large majority of DC fans argue that Tim Drake is the best Robin. Now, don't get me wrong, I really love the character. A lot of Bat Family characters have shown their admiration for Tim Drake. Batman has gone on the record of saying that Tim Drake has exceeded his expectations a number of times, and Nightwing has stated that Tim Drake is the best Robin. But to me, it's not just his skill sets and accomplishments that make him an interesting character. Now at this point, you're probably wondering, why do we love the Tim Drake character so much? In this video, I'm going to give you 3 reasons as to why people get behind this character. I really recommend you check out this video because, in my opinion, if you're writing a story, you really need a character like Tim Drake to keep your audience hooked. But before we move on, please be sure to like and subscribe to Reaver Comics. You don't want to miss out on our awesome content. Now, before I get into why we love this character so much, I'm going to give you a brief rundown on Tim Drake's history. A lot of people don't know this, but Tim Drake was there the night that the first Robin's parents got murdered. Tim Drake's parents, Jack and Janet, took him to Haley's Circus to see the Flying Graysons perform. Now, funny enough, Tim Drake actually met Dick Grayson there. The Drakes took a picture with the Flying Graysons before Tony Zuko murdered Dick's parents. Now, fast forward a couple years into the future. When Tim Drake was just a teenager, he figured out Batman and Robin's identities. Tim saw footage of Robin performing a quadruple somersault. He deduced that Dick Grayson was Robin since that was a rare maneuver that only a Flying Grayson could do. Afterwards, he puts 2 and 2 together and figures out that Batman is Bruce Wayne since Dick Grayson is his ward. Now, originally, Tim Drake did not want to be Robin. It wasn't until after the death of Jason Todd that Tim started to notice something. He noticed that Batman became a lot more aggressive and dysfunctional after the second Robin's death. It's here where Tim figures out that Batman needs a Robin. Tim eventually approached Dick Grayson, who was Nightwing at the time, and asked him to become Robin again. Dick Grayson largely refused because he became his own man and had the responsibility of leading the Teen Titans. And I imagine he was probably sick of dealing with Bruce's attitude. Eventually, Batman and Nightwing got captured by Two-Face, and Tim had no choice but to suit up as Robin to save them both. After that experience, he ended up gaining the respect of Batman, Nightwing, and Alfred. Soon after, everyone realized that Batman needs a Robin, and Tim started his training. Now, as a consequence of what happened to Jason, Tim Drake went through much more training, and Batman was far more overprotective of him. Batman would even encourage him to not engage in fighting unless it was absolutely necessary. This of course caused conflict between the dynamic duo because, like all the other Robins, Tim Drake wanted to prove himself. Now, what makes Tim Drake different from all the other Robins is that he had a relatively trauma-free childhood. Tim Drake actually came from a very healthy family. Both of his parents, Jack and Janet Drake, were archaeologists who often traveled abroad. Now, of course, Tim oftentimes got lonely because of this. But despite the loneliness, I think that we can all agree that this is much less traumatic than watching your parents get murdered by a criminal or growing up as a street orphan. Now, it wasn't until the time when Tim Drake started his career that he started to experience traumatic things. While Tim Drake was helping Batman out, his parents went through something absolutely awful. On a trip abroad, his mother was murdered and his father was left paralyzed by a villain known as Odeya Man. Batman was unable to save them. Now later on, Tim's dad moved to Bloodhaven and he started dating a lady known as Sarah Winters. Unfortunately for his dad, he got assassinated by one of the Flash's rogues, Captain Boomerang. Despite all these tragedies, Tim Drake kept on moving forward and pursued a life of crime fighting as Robin. Now, fast forward a couple years into the future. Batman presumably dies at the hands of Darkseid, and Dick Grayson has to pick up the Batman mantle. Dick Grayson fires Tim as Robin and gives the mantle to Damian Wayne since Dick sees Tim as an equal. As a consequence of this, Tim Drake created the Red Robin mantle, becomes convinced that Bruce is still alive, and goes on a worldwide search for him. Now that we know who Tim Drake is, let's dive into why so many people love this character. Number 1, he's the first Robin to wear pants. No, I'm just joking. He complements the Bat family really nicely. I mentioned this before in my Red Hood video. The link's in the description if you want to check it out. All of the Robins in the Bat family are different and offer something unique to the team. Dick Grayson is the athletic and acrobatic older brother. Jason Todd is the rebel anti-hero whose intense rage gives him an edge in fighting. Damian Wayne is the redemptive assassin who becomes a better person in the Bat family. And Tim Drake is the expert strategist whose detective skills are exceptional among all the members in the Bat family. By the way, the 0 Hours story arc is a great storyline that highlights the difference between Dick Grayson and Tim Drake. While Dick has a lot of natural-born athleticism, Tim has far superior detective skills, and he's far better with technology. Now, out of all the Robins, he has the most grounded origin story, which leads me to my next point. Tim Drake is the most relatable Robin. Dick Grayson was born in a family of acrobats in Haley's Circus. Jason Todd was a street orphan who had a mother that struggled with drug addiction and a father who was hired as muscle in Two-Face's gang. And Damian Wayne was born into the League of Assassins. The story of how he was conceived is even crazier. Talia al Ghul, drugged Batman, got intimate with him and later gave birth to Damian. What's even crazier is that Bruce had no recollection that happened to him. Crazy backstories aside, Tim has the most relatable origins out of everyone in the Bat family. Tim was born into a family that was very healthy and had solid foundations. He went to school, he made friends, hence, he's one of the most relatable characters in the Bat family. He's also one of the few characters that's not larger than life. Batman proved he could single-handedly subdue the entire Justice League. Nightwing, being the best acrobat in the DC universe, can pull off maneuvers no regular person can achieve, and Jason Todd quite literally came back from the dead. Tim Drake is easily one of the most human characters in the Bat family. And I'd argue that you need human and relatable characters in your story because A, how can you keep your story grounded without them? And B, how else are you supposed to connect your audience with these larger-than-life superheroes? I'll give you an example. In Daredevil, Foggy Nelson is an essential character. Why? Because if you have a protagonist who's a blind Catholic, has superhuman senses that beats up crime bosses and ninjas outside of his full-time job as a lawyer, you're gonna need a grounded character in there that bridges the gap between the regular people in the audience and the larger-than-life stuff that happens in the story. Tim Drake is one of the few characters in the Bat family that people can actually relate to. He came from a nice home with loving parents and worked hard to achieve the things that he wanted out of life. Now, keep in mind, when you're developing a story, you don't necessarily need a tragic backstory for your protagonist. If done right, relatability is all you need. Take what happens in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. When the story starts out, we get to know Miles as this regular kid from Brooklyn who came from a solid family and went to school like most of us do. This Spider-Man movie does not start out with a tragic backstory. Instead, the film introduces us to how we relate to Miles Morales, and funny enough, that played a large part in getting us to care about the character. I love those small and subtle moments we have with Tim Drake that make him feel all the more relatable. There's these occasional times that Tim Drake shows his imposter syndrome. Every once in a while, you get to see that little bit of fear and doubt creep up on him before he goes out on a mission. This is one of the many things that makes him relatable. Like all of us, adrenaline starts to go through our system when we do sports, intense activities, or go through stressful times in our career. Having those subtle moments with Tim Drake where the imposter syndrome creeps up on him is very important. Whether we like to admit it or not, this is a relatable aspect that everyone goes through every once in a while. I even remember a time in the comics when Tim Drake straight up says to Dick Grayson that he's not ready to go on a mission. This was in the Batman Prodigal story arc. Now, of course, Tim Drake does not do this all the time. The point that I'm trying to make is that if you have a character that expresses human emotions every once in a while, this will greatly enhance the storytelling experience. And Tim Drake brings the best out of people. While Tim Drake isn't quite the natural-born leader like Dick Grayson is, he's still pretty great with people. He led a couple variations of the Teen Titans, and he managed to bring the best out of Batman. After Jason's death, Bruce couldn't quite forgive himself for a long time, and rightly so. He found a street orphan and got him to fight criminals until he got captured and beaten to death by the Joker. Batman became really reckless and aggressive after that experience. When Tim came along, he brought out Bruce's best qualities. He helped him get out of his state of self-loathing and encouraged him to keep fighting the good fight. Batman became very protective of Tim and didn't put him in harm's way unless it was absolutely necessary. To put it simply, he balanced out Batman's demeanor much like Dick Grayson did. While Bruce was brooding, Tim was optimistic. When Batman was aggressive, Robin added some much needed lightheartedness. To put it simply, Bruce found comfort in the dark while Tim found comfort in the light. Anyways, there's so many great things to say about Tim Drake. Like Dick Grayson, he eventually left the Robin mantle and became his own hero. And he's earned much respect from DC Comics villains and heroes alike. Like I mentioned earlier, when Dick became Batman, he wouldn't let Tim be his Robin because he viewed Tim as his equal. When Superboy Prime was a problem, he did the smart thing and trained Crypto to attack him while other DC heroes couldn't stand against him. And Ra's al Ghul referred to him as Detective, which is a high sign of praise. This is usually only a title that he addresses Batman as. But what do you think? Do you think Tim Drake is the most relatable Bat Family character? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, please be sure to like and subscribe to Reverb Comics. You do not want to miss out on our awesome content. Stay groovy.